There are some books that feel less like stories and more like old towns you once lived in. You remember the dust in the streets, the sound of a screen door closing somewhere in the afternoon heat, the strange silence that arrives when children suddenly realize the world is not as fair as they imagined. To Kill a Mockingbird is one of those books. It does not scream its wisdom at you. It sits quietly on the porch beside you, speaking in a calm voice, while the world around it burns with prejudice, fear, loneliness, innocence, and moral courage. And somehow, decades after it was written, it still feels painfully alive. There's a moment in childhood when you realize adults are not giants. They are just frightened people wearing larger clothes. And perhaps one of the hardest things in life is watching goodness remain calm in a world determined to misunderstand it. That is the emotional heartbeat of this book. At first glance, it feels deceptively simple. A small southern town, children playing in the summer heat, neighborhood myths, schoolyard fights, old houses with closed curtains and whispered stories. But beneath that gentle surface, something razor sharp. This is a story about justice, about racism, about moral loneliness, about empathy, and about the terrifying ease with which society can decide who deserves humanity and who does not. And the remarkable thing is, the book never feels preachy. It feels human. So today, let's sit with this book for a while, not like students studying a classic, but like readers returning to a conversation that still matters. The dust in the streets of Maycomb, the screen door closing in the afternoon heat, that quiet. Once you've lived inside this book, some part of you never quite leaves it. To Kill a Mockingbird was published in 1960 by Harper Lee, and almost immediately became one of the most influential novels in American literature. What makes that fascinating is that Harper Lee did not become a literary machine, constantly producing books. She remained famously private, quietly protective of her own life and work. There's something almost poetic about that. She wrote one deeply human book, and it echoed across generations. The story is set in the fictional town of Maycomb, Alabama, during the Great Depression, and we experience this world through the eyes of Scout Finch, one of the most memorable child narrators in all of literature. Scout is curious, impulsive, observant, and unintentionally honest in the way only children can be. Through her eyes, we encounter her brother Jem, the mysterious Boo Radley, and of course, Atticus Finch. Atticus is one of those literary characters who quietly enters culture and never really leaves. Not because he is perfect, but because he chooses decency even when decency becomes costly. And that distinction matters enormously. Harper Lee wrote this novel during the height of the American Civil Rights Movement. She understood that the most powerful political writing doesn't argue with you. It places you inside a human experience until argument becomes unnecessary. That's what makes Atticus Finch more persuasive than any essay ever written on the same subject. The novel revolves around a legal case that exposes the racial tensions and moral fractures of the town. Without spoiling anything important, the case becomes less about facts and more about the terrifying machinery of collective prejudice. A community deciding not what is true, but what it needs to believe. You can feel Harper Lee examining a society where innocence is not equally protected, where dignity is selective, where truth itself bends under the weight of fear and inherited hatred. But what gives the novel its emotional power is the contrast between darkness and tenderness. Children still laugh, neighbors still gossip, people still drink lemonade on porches. Life continues, even while injustice quietly poisons the foundations underneath. And honestly, that feels disturbingly realistic, because history rarely announces evil with thunder. Sometimes it arrives wearing normal clothes. Sometimes it sits comfortably at the dinner table. Sometimes it speaks in the calm voice of people absolutely convinced they are being reasonable. The genius of setting this story through a child's eyes is that Scout doesn't yet know what she's supposed to ignore. Adults have learned to look away from certain things. Children haven't. And that unfiltered witnessing, that inability to pretend, is what makes Scout's narration so quietly devastating. Beneath the plot, To Kill a Mockingbird is really exploring 4 ideas that never seem to age. The first is empathy, and this is the moral spine of the entire novel. One of the most famous ideas from the book is that you never truly understand someone until you step into their skin and walk around in it. Simple sentence, enormous challenge. Because most people do not actually want understanding. They want confirmation. The book repeatedly asks whether human beings are capable of seeing beyond rumor, fear, class, race, reputation, and inherited assumptions. And it answers that question honestly, without easy comfort. The second is innocence and what we destroy when fear replaces compassion. The title carries symbolic weight that changes everything once you notice it. Mockingbirds represent innocence, gentle beings that do no harm and yet become targets anyway. And once you see that symbolism, the entire story shifts. It becomes a meditation on what societies sacrifice when they choose prejudice over humanity. Not just individual lives, but innocence itself. The third is moral courage, and this book presents a quieter form of bravery than we usually imagine. Modern culture often pictures courage as cinematic, music swelling, heroic speeches, crowds applauding. But Atticus Finch embodies something rarer and more difficult: the courage to stand alone, to remain calm while being misunderstood, to do what is right knowing you will probably lose. Sometimes morality sounds like a steady voice in a hostile room. Dignity does not always need noise. And the fourth, perhaps the most quietly devastating, is what children notice. Scout's narration works so brilliantly because children observe everything, even what they don't yet fully understand. They notice hypocrisy, fear, tenderness, cruelty, silences. And there's a strange ache in realizing that childhood is partly the gradual discovery that adults are improvising morality as they go. Cruelty in this book rarely comes from obvious monsters. It comes from ordinary people, convinced they are protecting order, convinced their fear is reasonable, convinced their prejudice is simply the way things are. That is the most chilling thing Harper Lee understood. Evil rarely announces itself. It normalizes. Reading To Kill a Mockingbird feels different depending on the stage of life you're in. When you're younger, the book feels like an emotional coming-of-age story. The warmth of Maycomb, the summer adventures, the slow awakening of conscience. Later, it starts feeling like a warning. You begin noticing how easily groups justify unfairness, how quickly people dehumanize others once society gives permission, how reputation can overpower truth, how silence sometimes protects broken systems more effectively than violence does. But despite all its heaviness, I don't think this is a hopeless book. Melancholic, yes. Painfully honest, definitely. But hopeless? No. Because at its core, the novel still believes human beings can choose decency. Not perfectly, not consistently, but consciously. And there's also something deeply comforting about the atmosphere of this novel, even as it breaks your heart. The sleepy streets of Maycomb, summer afternoons stretching endlessly, children inventing stories about mysterious neighbors. The book feels warm and haunted at the same time, like sunlight falling across an old courtroom, or a dusty library where history still refuses to sleep. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Harper Lee is this: she made a profoundly political and moral novel feel completely personal. You don't merely analyze this story, you live inside it for a while. And when you leave, something has quietly rearranged itself in the way you see people. Should you read To Kill a Mockingbird? Yes, unreservedly. Not because schools assign it, but because it continues asking questions humanity still hasn't answered. What does justice mean when society itself is biased? Can empathy survive fear? What kind of courage does goodness actually require? And how do we protect innocence in a world that often rewards cruelty? Read it slowly. Let the world of Maycomb settle around you. Let Scout's voice do its work. Because this is a quiet novel. And quiet books sometimes leave the deepest echoes, not because they shout louder than the world, but because they help us hear ourselves more clearly inside it. The dust in the streets, the screen door closing in the afternoon heat, that particular silence. Once you've lived inside this book, some part of you never quite leaves Maycomb. And maybe that's exactly how Harper Lee intended it. Because the questions this book asks are questions we are still trying to answer. And with that, me, Nikhil, signing off. We'll meet again soon with another book, another quiet conversation, and another cup of coffee. Until then, take care. If you get some value from this video, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Share this video to a fellow reader and keep turning the page. Thank you.